Jesse selling up, and I'm the leader of a band called Tin Pan. I play trumpet and I sing. I've been playing music since I was like 4 or 5 years old, and that's a mighty long time. The trumpet, I mean, I've been playing trumpet since I was a boy, since I was about 8, and for the trumpet there's not so many interesting options, you know, and jazz and blues is kind of the most expressive that I've heard of that kind of stuff. I studied jazz for a while. The blues, that just kind of happens, you know. I played guitar for quite a bit, I still do. The name of the band is Tin Pan, and I guess there's a couple of reasons for it. I have a mute. I found that if you use a takeout dish, like a aluminum takeout dish, you can get some great sounds out of it. So that's the tin pan that you'll see on stage from time to time. But also, I guess Louis Armstrong, he said that there was 2 kinds of music that he was interested in playing. One was the Tin Pan Alley kind of music, and the other was the blues. And so it's just kind of an abbreviation somehow of that kind of idea. Although the music we're playing really isn't Tin Pan Alley music. We do a couple of those tunes in a bluesy way, but for the most part, it's just kind of a throwback to that concept from the 20s or 30s, you know. I think there's like 3 different kinds of music that we play. There's really old, spiritual, gospel-y kind of stuff, like the Old Rugged Cross, My Life Will Be Sweeter Someday, the Old Spinning Wheel, those kind of tunes that, you know, predate any kind of copyright laws, and they're just part of our culture. We don't even know who wrote them. They're just listed as traditional. Some of them are out of hymns and out of the hymnals. And for those we do in a kind of, you know, country-ish, gospel-y, bluesy kind of way. And then there's like New Orleans kind of standard tunes, 1940s and earlier, some Django Reinhardt tunes, some songs that Louis Armstrong made popular. And then there's tunes that I've written that seem to work for this band. I write music in a lot of different styles, but when I find one that I think this is going to be good for the group, I'll bring it in and we'll try to play it. And you know, maybe a 1/5 of them work, and the ones that really work, really work. So on our new album, there's 3 of my songs on it. On our previous album, I think there was 4 or 5 of my songs on it. But also the good stuff, you know, basically all the emotions that I'm feeling and all the wonderful life that I'm living, and you know, all the, you know, what can you say? Life is so varied and there's so much stuff going on inside. And it's like anything in the arts. If you're connecting to something that's real, that you're experiencing, and then you're just focusing on the reality of your experience, chances are that's a universal thing and people will be able to relate to it. And you know, whatever, that's the magic of communication, that's why it works, you know. Let me put it this way, like, technically, like harmonically speaking, there's not so many options. Like compared to modern jazz or avant jazz, where you can pretty much play any note at any time, in this kind of pre-20s, pre-30s music, harmonically, you only have maybe 5 or 6 choices at any time about the note that's going to be the right note. That much being said, you really have to be crazy expressive and really clever and creative. Ultimately, just more expressive. You really have to be feeling it if it's going to sound good, if it's going to sound interesting. Because you can't do that with like colorful different kinds of notes, with extended harmonies, with extended techniques, blah, blah, blah. You really need to really be feeling it. So is that religious? I don't know if it's religious, but if you're connecting to yourself, then, you know, if you're expressing yourself and you're connecting to yourself, then that feels like a true experience. So let's just leave it at that. You know, so when you can be true and you be real, then the music works. And if you're not that, then, you know, it's just kind of boring basic music, I think. Yeah, is the music typically American, typically New York? It's definitely typically American. I mean, it's definitely American in that there's a lot of different traditions rolled up into one, a lot of different influences, and, you know, jazz music is America's really indigenous art form, one of the few that actually was born and raised here. Actually, I think it's typically not New York. We play music that's really slow. I mean, it's a lot slower than most bands in New York play. And that's one of our distinguishing factors, is that we can play stuff really slow and really bluesy and really draggy, and the time feels really draggy. A lot of that has to do with our guitar player, Clifton, who's from Mississippi, and it's just a whole different southern way of understanding the beat and how to get people to dance and how to get people to move. And when I listen to a lot of New York bands, I think, okay, they're too fast, they're too in their heads. You know, some of them are great, don't get me wrong, many of them are, but you know, we really just want to slow things down and take things easy and have that back porch kind of feeling to it. So that's typically not New York. However, on the pro New York side, we're playing out in Central Park like 150, 180 times a year. So that's a really New York thing, to have like a street band in the middle of a public place, you know, adding to the culture of the city that we live in. That seems like a really New York thing to do. sound is sound, and whatever. This is boring, but I guess music is like, they say that it's organized sound, so that can happen a lot of different ways. Right now, currently, if it's instrumental and it's different, people call it jazz, which is kind of lame because it's so all encapsulating that it feels like that's kind of a weak answer. What is your music? My music is jazz. It's like boring. You know, for me, it's just personal, and there's a lot of different extensions of that. So I don't know. You call it what you want. I just call it the music that I'm hearing. So, you know, it happens a lot of different ways. It also happens in different contexts with different people that I'm playing. Some of it is avant-garde, some of it is like more modern jazz, some of it is, I did a gypsy jazz gig last night with this great gypsy guitar player. For me, okay, so there's some distinguishing characteristics. One of them seems to be the improvisation aspect, that there's a strong improvisational element. But after that, I mean, it's a box. It's like saying, what is art? I mean, it's so porous and open, and ultimately it's just a very personal thing. So, and this is coming from a guy, like, I was the founder and director of the Williamsburg Jazz Festival. I actually was a jazz presenter, and I still struggle with that word, what is jazz? You know, for me, it's like the same way when someone comes up to you and say, hey, you remind me of my friend so-and-so. Like, there's a part of you that always feels insulted. You're like, I'm me, I'm not your friend. Like, why would you say that I remind you of somebody else? So when someone says to me that my music is jazz, I just feel like they've taken something away from me. It's like, why? I'm not that, I'm this. All right, let's go. So I think the basic answer, what is jazz, is it's generally instrument driven. Or if you're using the voice, it's using the voice as an instrument. There's an improvisation element. For my stuff, what I like is the small group stuff, you know, quartets, quintets, you know, other than that, the big band stuff. When I see a jazz band, I don't expect there to be music on stage. I feel like people know it from their heart and they're performing it from the heart. It's not like classical music where they all have music in front of them and they're reading off of it. So those are the elements. It's fun, it's playful, it's expressive, all these different emotions. And also it seems like it's somewhere between folksy and virtuoso. There's a folksy element that everyone can relate to, and then there's this virtuoso element that the people who are doing it are like really talented at what they do, and that makes it like this brilliant, you know, exciting thing to do and listen to. So I think that's what people are talking about when they're talking about jazz in general. Then you get to like the specifics of all the different genres and subgenres and sub-subgenres, and then there's like, you know, different sets of criterion. So gypsy jazz, like you mentioned, you know, in the style of Django Reinhardt, generally no horns, generally mostly strings. A string, guitar, two guitars, a violin, and an upright bass. Tempos are usually faster, and the harmony is a little bit more complex than the early New Orleans stuff. So, you know, there's all these theoretical kind of things that delineate these genres, but I mean, this is not a philosophy lecture. This is